Fan creations have always been an integral part of the Professor Layton fandom, keeping the Layton name alive long after the series has ended. From artwork to fanfiction, and even original pieces of music having been composed, fans of the series are truly unstoppable in creating some fantastic works of art. But there's one medium that has rarely ever been covered, due to the sheer amount of planning and asset creation needed to pull it off so well: fan games. As it stands, two main contenders seem to be trying to push for a Layton Fangame to be released in the coming years. There's Team Top Hat's Professor Layton and the Thespian's Curse, and Professor Layton and the Raven's Curse, led by Inky. Raven's Curse picks up about a year after the events of the original trilogy, with Luke having moved to America and the Professor and Flora going back to their day-to-day lives. However, another mystery unfolds as a legend comes true. The Ravens of the Tower of London have disappeared, along with several government officials. After historian Vincent Falco claims to have the answers, the Professor and Flora join Luke abroad in the States as they solve the puzzle of the Raven's Curse and the generations-long feud between two great families. Thespian's Curse, however, is set between the events of Pandora's Box and Lost Future, and sees Layton receive a letter from a concerned stranger, led to believe he's the target of a mysterious curse. Layton, Luke and Flora embark on a trip up north, investigating the town's enigmatic past and the ghosts said to haunt it. But not only are the guys at Team Top Hat working on an original game, they're also developing a tool called the Layton Editor, which aims to make the difficulty creating fan games a thing of the past. More on that later. And while these games certainly seem to have a lot of backing behind them, one game has remained relatively unknown, ever since it first appeared online way back in August of 2012. Professor Layton and the Lost City was a puzzle adventure game created in 2012 for the Nintendo PC. It followed Layton, Luke and Emmy as they traversed the City of London and tried to solve a bizarre case full of perplexing puzzles. But despite the game being released over 10 years ago, very few fans have ever come across it. So, after all this time, shrouded in enigmas, today I thought I'd take a gander and shine some light on this forgotten Layton mystery. But before we start, the biggest question is, who actually made it? Me. I've spoken about it before, both here on the channel and also on the Level With Us podcast, check that out below. But my first introduction to the Layton series was way back in early 2009, after discovering Curious Village as one of the hundreds of games on an R4 card I received from a family friend the previous Christmas. But the first time I actually joined the fandom wasn't until the 29th of March 2012, signing up to be an editor on the Professor Layton Wikia. For those who don't know, the Layton Wikia, now known as layton.fandom.com, is a website that contains encyclopedic amounts of information on and around the series, with articles covering characters, locations, storylines, and even more. My username was Detective Inspector Bob, which was essentially an OC I made for myself. And this is the character I made.
Look at the top of his head!
Looking back, the time that I joined the wiki was right in the centre of my "lol, I'm so random" cringe phase, essentially, which everyone seems to go through at one point in their life. And if you sat there now thinking, well, I've not had a cringe phase, I hate to break it to you, but you're living in it now. If you scroll down on my old profile on the site, there's some fun Bob trivia right at the bottom, but I can categorically say that fact 4 was definitely not true. You can search through as many wikis as you like, but you're not going to get a result. My early contributions on the site were mostly pictures, giving illustration to some of the character pages or locations, but after a while I created my first ever article, Midland Road, explaining the location in Lost Future. One of my other early contributions was Amelie Chelmy, a whole page dedicated to Inspector Chelmy's wife, first seen in Curious Village. When she turned up as a proper character in Azran Legacy, I genuinely believe that she might have been included because of my article. Wasn't always the brightest child. Looking back, I remember feeling really anxious about joining the Wiki chat, as I feared it was going to be filled with super serious editors who only really wanted to talk about writing articles and the future plans for the site. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Over time, I made so many new friends with total strangers on the internet, bonding over the fact that we all shared an interest in this obscure puzzle game on the DS, which was great, given that very few people I knew in the real world had ever even heard of such a game. There was Professor Triton 13, Emma Major, Nikki Altava, Sophia Descalay 13, Chrononaut, Lil Puzzlet 64, Sonic Titanic 23, and so many more. Most days, once I'd come home from school, I'd finish my homework and immediately hop on the laptop to chat to other Layton fans all over the world. Much to the warnings of my mum, who thought they were all axe-wielding mass murderers preying on awkward nerds online. The chat was always full of obscure in-jokes that would take far too long to explain now, but it was such a nice community of people who just bonded over a game. I remember I also used to roleplay as Inspector Chelmy in the group chat, solving puzzles across London, and even became part of an exclusive DeviantArt group called Layton's Little London, where loads of people came together to roleplay scenarios in a fictitious town, full of puzzles and mysteries. In fact, one year, Little London had a Halloween roleplay session, which was hyped up for about a month, and everyone was really looking forward to it. But of course that year, all my cousins turned up round our house, so I couldn't actually take part because everyone was playing with my SpongeBob Lego and asking me questions while I was trying to channel my inner Chelmy and solve a spooky case. Unbelievable. But eventually, after so many roleplay sessions and chaos in the group chat, I started working on a fan project myself. Professor Layton and the Lost City had no more than half an hour's worth of gameplay, and followed Layton, Luke and Emmy as they travelled across the city of London, investigating how the entire population of the capital had disappeared overnight. The backgrounds were created on cartoonized.net, and the characters were mostly traced art, using the remote access version of Photoshop on my school's network. The story was full of plot holes and mysteries that were never actually solved, and the puzzles all had to be riddles, as I couldn't work actual game mechanics into a PowerPoint presentation. That's how I made it, by the way. In PowerPoint. Generally speaking, it wasn't too dissimilar to the Bast Who Shut Down My Chimney video on this channel, but back then I wanted people to take it seriously. And with scenes like this, I don't know who I was kidding. One morning, a crusty JPEG of Layton awakes in his office, finding it strange that Rosa hasn't woken him yet. He meets up with a panicked Emmy and Luke, and soon realises that somehow the entire population of London seems to have vanished overnight. Why Layton, Luke and Emmy were still there though? Well, all shall be revealed. As they headed out into the streets in search of clues, the gang found a newspaper article in a city centre pub called The Boatman. It shares the story of a man called Dr. Jake Bono, a scientist working at the London Science Facility, working on a machine that will cure all diseases. And the final presentation happened last night. A fun flashback sequence now lets us play as Dr. Bono himself in the line-up to the presentation, and as one of my favourite lines of dialogue in the whole game, as Dr. Bono realises that his lab partner, Professor Jackal, has forgotten to include a key part of the machine.
Oh my! He forgot to add this mechanism here! It's what makes the cogs turn, and without it, a huge explosion will be made! I have to get down there right now and make sure he stops the presentation!
As Dr. Bono progresses through the winding labyrinth of cut-out art-style laboratories, he eventually finds a pile of diary entries, conveniently left out on the floor, which reveals the shocking news that Professor Jackal has removed the part on purpose. This then gives him 5 minutes to escape before the machine blows up, taking out London's population with an airborne chemical disease, causing them to disintegrate and fade into oblivion. Scary. Reaching the presentation hall, Dr. Bono confronts Professor Jackal and tries to evacuate the building, but to little success, as the Professor rigs the machine to explode instantly. And then this slide appears. See, I don't know what I love more. Is it the backroom style foyer, the MS Paint open doors, or even Dr. Bono's hand that's a completely separate tone to his face and looks like he's put a woolly glove on the wrong hand? But that's the last we see of the lab for now. Chapter 3 reunites us with Layton and Co in the Boatman as they head out to Scotland Yard in search of more clues. As they advance through the abandoned streets, Luke begins to feel a mysterious presence watching them from the shadows, though Layton assures him that it's absolutely nothing and he's imagining the whole thing, and he's nuts if he thinks he saw something because he 100% wholeheartedly did not.
I do not care, Luke. I simply do not.
The gang then turn the corner and reach the now ruined London Science Facility, complete with animated GIFs and a non-transparent PNG steaming up through the roof. Despite the raging fire, Layton decides that it's best for the group to wait for the fire to die down before searching for clues, or even survivors, and they continue onwards towards the London Museum, which they then go exploring in because Layton wants to see a dinosaur exhibit in the foyer. But, dear friends, all does not go to plan, as it turns out that Layton's earlier gaslighting outside the pub has come back to haunt him. Enter the Black Knight.
Yo, what up? It's me.
The Black Knight is a very mysterious character, almost as if he was written into the story without any thought towards the larger plot. But it's likely that he was hired by Professor Jackal to dispose of any survivors. And as revenge for telling Luke that his feelings don't actually matter, the Black Knight takes it upon himself to destroy the lovely dinosaur exhibit Layton wanted to see, attempting to kill Layton and, well, actually, all the gang in one fell swoop.
No, wait! What are you doing, Step Knight?
But he missed, and they all go outside and pretend it didn't happen. The gang continues onwards to Scotland Yard, but this time in our wacky adventure, Luke gets distracted by a cat and chases it through Cornelius's flower shop, leading the gang towards Central Station. After Layton gets onto the warpath at his young apprentice for running off in what's basically the apocalypse, Luke gives him a puzzle and everything turns out fine. As Layton and Emmy pop to the shops in the station, Luke shits his britches yet again, this time hearing moaning coming from the London Underground. However, if you thought this could be a vicious monster or a demonic being, I'm sorry to disappoint, as it's actually just a regular woman. But not just any regular woman, no. This here is Paris, one of the other editors on the Layton Wiki. Paris explains that she's been trapped on the train since the early hours of the morning, having returned from the Sick AF dance club downtown. After solving her puzzle, she entrusts you with the story of the strange incident she experienced the previous night, where a mysterious scientist boarded the train before releasing a thick white smoke from a briefcase and disappearing, along with the rest of the passengers. But not her, for some reason. With Paris in tow, the gang head upstairs to the station restaurant, but what? What's this? Dr. Bono? Here? But how? Dr. Bono is shocked to find surviving humans, but he explains that he worked at the London Science Facility and now believes the mass execution of the capital's population, and presumably the wider world given the lack of urban explorers and Japanese tourists, is equally his fault for not stopping Professor Jackal. When he left the lab, however, he conveniently found a button in his jacket pocket which could stop the machine from functioning. How it counteracted the airborne death gas is beyond me, but the machine got turned off, essentially. Dr. Bono explains that Professor Jackal must have had a vendetta against the city after he became a homeless orphan at a young age and was constantly ridiculed on the streets for being a dirty peasant. As to his plans at large though, well, I don't know. While Dr. Bono is explaining his story, Paris realises that the man she saw on the train the previous night was Professor Jackal, which meant that he might still be local if he had also survived the massacre. Unfortunately, Dr. Bono knows of a local park where Jackal used to frequent as a child. The gang head out to Hargreaves Park, which was literally named after Matt Hargreaves, the voice of Matt from Eddsworld, and confront Professor Jackal at the bandstand. The professor explains his tragic backstory: abandoned by his parents, lived in a shit orphanage, broke out and lived on the streets, became a petty thief, got burgled himself, and probably got arrested at some point along the way. And so he did the one thing that he knew would change all of that. A change that would give him a life of strength and stability, and a change that would make everything bend in his favour. He made an undisclosed, never again mentioned, scientific discovery which promptly made him very rich, and now he wants to destroy the city, first by taking away its population, and then flattening the entire thing. And to do that, he built this. Before Professor Jackal can pulverise the city though, Dr. Bono remembers some blueprints he saw in the lab several years ago, and realises they must have been for this machine. He very quickly tells the gang that, in order to stop the machine, they must solve a riddle attached to each of the limbs of the mecha. And after doing just that, the whole thing goes... Disgruntled, Professor Jackal reveals one final trick up his sleeve, the Death Ray. Aiming it at Layton, Luke and Emmy and getting ready to fire, Dr. Bono realises the decision he has to make and dives in front of the PowerPoint rectangle that's been fired at the gang, sacrificing himself. Professor Jackal reveals that the bandstand Mecca was what was keeping the population of London in some weird kind of purgatory, but its destruction meant that everybody could return to reality. He then runs away. As Jake lays on the floor, dying, he asks the Professor to tell his wife that he loves her, and that nothing Professor Jackal could do would ever prevent him from saving the city he loved. And slowly but surely, the city begins to return, as Dr. Bono's ghost watches over from above, and the disgraced Professor Jackal plots his next move. Which he made. Looking back, I remember being so excited to share this game when everything was completed. After spending weeks and weeks poring over it, making all the assets and writing the story, being able to share it with my mates online was fantastic. And even though we've all lost contact over the years, it's great that I've still got a little online community, united by a love of the Layton games. Just not this one. The Layton Fangame series was originally planned out to be much longer, with a third game, Professor Layton and the Ruined Statue, planned for a release in mid-2013. I even specifically took photos on our family holiday in 2012 that I wanted to use as backgrounds in the game. From what I remember, Layton received a postcard from a friend after an important statue in his town was stolen and he needed the Professor's assistance to find it. Similarly, I also planned a Christmas special, Inspector Chelmy and the Christmas Mystery, very creative title there, as well as Professor Layton and the Broken Vase, which saw Layton solve a murder where the only evidence was a smashed decorative urn. Next was Professor Layton and the Silent Spell, the case that Layton could be seen solving at the start of Eternal Diva, and despite never playing an actual Phoenix Wright game, I even wrote up part of the plot to a crossover between Inspector Chelmy and Detective Gumshoe, called the Dimension Case. None of that got made. Even though my blog posts back on the Wiki in 2012 were, well, totally cringe, having the opportunity as a kid to talk to others online about the series was brilliant, especially given that my friends IRL just didn't seem to care about the games. I think if it weren't for my involvement in the Wiki and the Layton community way back then, this channel probably wouldn't exist right now, and so I want to say a big thanks to all the editors, old and new, and all the other Layton fans for my time on the Wiki. Back at the start of the video, I mentioned that Team Top Hat were working on an editor for an original Layton Fangame, and while it's still in its early stages and needs further development to fully work, you can still check it out on GitHub in the description below. I had a little play around myself to see if I could make the Kababi Chronicles fully playable as a DS game, but just this one scene in David's curry shop and pizza house took about 3 hours to get working. In addition to the editor though, the team is also working on creating a playable version of Professor Layton and the Mansion of the Deathly Mirror, the Lost Layton mobile game, using surviving gameplay footage and articles about the game. Compared to the original screenshots, the guys have done an amazing job at recreating some of the game's assets, and I'll leave all their links below if you want to find out more. If you want to look through the Lost City slideshow yourself and try to solve the puzzles, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. And maybe one day I'll do a read through with some mates. As I'm sure you're aware, I haven't uploaded anything now in about 2 months, but I am going to try and push some more stuff out very soon. And unless you've been living under a rock or were still stuck in Professor Jackal's weird purgatory, then it's probably been ingrained into your head by now, but if you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing and leaving a thumbs up, as it really helps me figure out what kind of things people want to see. And maybe someday I'll talk about Lost City's sequel too. Cheers all, see you next time.